But first, in his address to the 79th UN General Assembly, Nigeria's Vice President Kashim Shettima called for urgent global cooperation on critical issues including democracy, climate change, security, and UN reform. He highlighted concerns over unconstitutional changes of government in Africa's Sahel region, urging international support for democratic stability. Shettima reiterated Nigeria's commitment to climate goals, pressing developed nations to fulfill their $100 billion pledge for climate damage funds. He also called for self-reliant African security mechanisms and reforms to give Africa permanent representation on the UN Security Council. Nigeria reaffirmed support for Palestinian independence and emphasized the need for sustained multilateral efforts to address global challenges.
Billions of dollars are being committed to the prosecution of wars and the planning of the embers of conflict. Yet, we always recoil from bringing out the resources we need to build peace and to deliver life's necessities to people. The question of governance is at the heart of our problems and also the solution to them. We recognize this in Nigeria when on 12th June this year, we celebrated a quarter of a century of unbroken democratic rule. We are no less proud of this achievement than the fact that during the last 2 decades, a sustained process of democratization has swept over Africa. However, the return of unconstitutional changes of government and forceful military takeovers in some countries of the Sahel underscore the fragility of democracy when it is not backed by economic development and sustained peace and security. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, climate change is a driver of insecurity, which also poses a veritable challenge to sustainable development. A few weeks ago, large areas of my country were inundated by seasonal flood waters, including one of our largest cities, Maiduguri in the northeast. Other parts of Nigeria also experienced similar tragedies, occasioning the loss of lives and property. We need not remind ourselves to remain faithful to the implementation of the commitments that we all gave voluntarily at the various COP meetings. Failure to do so is merely to postpone the inevitable. No country is immune from the effects of climate change. It is better that we cooperate and collaborate to meet this ever-increasing challenge rather than remaining in our shells, waiting for the inevitable to happen. A common challenge requires a common solution. Nigeria stands ready to meet her obligations in terms of mitigation and adaptation measures nationally and regionally, with the active participation of other countries and international partners. Mr. President, reform of the Security Council is critical if the UN is to strengthen its relevance and credibility in our rapidly changing world. Some permanent members of the United Nations Security Council have offered encouraging, if tentative, indications of support on the issue of reform of the Council. We welcome the change in tone and urge an acceleration in momentum to the process. The Security Council should be expanded in the permanent and non-permanent member categories to reflect the diversity and plurality of the world. We fully support the efforts of the Secretary General Guterres in this regard. Africa must be accorded the respect that it deserves in the Security Council. Our continent deserves a place in the permanent members category of the Security Council with the same rights and responsibilities as other permanent members.
You know, very, very unusual. This is a very special United Nations General Assembly with focus on SDGs, and SDGs are the focal point. Africa is mostly in the focus. Nigeria and Niger State, where I'm coming from, we also need to be in perspective, especially as it affects climate change, food security, security of life and properties of people, and other very important factors. So this is a very important representation, and we are glad to be here.
sometimes a lot of these discussions just don't trickle down back home. I followed the delegation across the world over the past 12 months, and I can see the hard work that's been put in. It just doesn't trickle down. Can you talk to me about some of the tangible discussions you've had?
Yeah, let me first beam on the climate change. A lot of resources, over $8 trillion is there in the carbon market, in the climate change. Africa is not in perspective, and so we are basically doing a conservation instead. So there's need for Africa, to be given opportunity to, tap from these resources that are available, because the emission is not from Africa mostly. These emissions are from this West and Americas. So we should be the people to balance the ecosystem for their emissions, instead of the other way around. Again, on the issues of the effects of climate change, you can see the amount of flooding happening in Africa. You can see the planting season that has, changed, completely. Not for our fault, fault of ours mostly, for the fault of these great people, the great countries around the world. So the conversation around helping Africa, it shouldn't be like that. It should be Africa putting their demand on the table to say, okay, this is what we stand, to protect. If not, we'll bring down all our trees, so that we see if conservation doesn't really work, So that it's good for people to understand that the sequestration of forests that we're doing, we should get something for that equivalent, Then transition from fossil fuel to cleaner energy, renewable energy. This is very important for us too. And in the last COP28 in Dubai, those issues have been discussed. In the last UNGA, we've discussed these issues. And in perspective, we've seen significant, amount of resources deployed, for all this initiative. So this is good.
Being in charge of women and children in my country, Nigeria, Africa, that makes me in charge of over 70% of Nigerian population. There's nothing you can discuss without women and children. Everything concerning United Nations is all about women and children, security, peace, and so on and so forth. Even in the security and peace, you still must have to bring in women and children. So I'm here to stand firmly in what I am pursuing in Nigeria to change the narratives. Because before now, the focus was more on advocacies, policies, policy making, consultancies, and too much talk. I'm here because as I speak to you, I have changed the narrative in Nigeria, where I have changed the action plan with UNICEF, UN Women, and more are yet to come. And if I don't change those narratives with any of them, I think I will make things very difficult for them to work in Nigeria, because they have done the same thing over and over again, and we keep getting poorer and poorer. More people are dying every day out of poverty. So everybody should know that if you keep doing something and it's not working, you change your plans. So that's what I'm trying to do. So I want the UN people to understand it, and I'll make arrangement to see the UN secretary to the UN overall and explain to him that it's time for Africa to grow. Thank you.